For young, hungry entrepreneurs, the future of work seems bright indeed. The Internet of Things is going to allow us to do things faster, smarter, and more efficiently. But for the rest of us, the idea of not having a job can seem absolutely terrifying. It raises serious questions about how will I pay my rent? How will I pay my mortgage? How will I even pay for my next meal? Malcolm Torry seems to think he has the answer to these questions. We asked Charles Bathold to go talk to him about his promotion of a citizen's basic income.
What is basic income?
Basic income is a very simple idea. It's sometimes called by other names, citizens' income, universal basic income, now sometimes citizens' basic income. They all mean the same thing. They mean an unconditional income for every individual. An unconditional means that the amount you get wouldn't depend on your income or your wealth or your employment status or your relationships with anybody else. It would be exactly the same amount of money for everyone of the same age. It could vary with somebody's age, so somebody who's older might get more, somebody who's younger might get less, child will get less, but otherwise it remains entirely unconditional.
How much are we talking about in this country, in the UK?
That's a very interesting question because all kinds of different suggestions have, of course, been made. The research that we've done suggests this. If you had a large citizen's basic income, the tax rates required to pay for it would be quite high. That might not be politically feasible. What we have proved is that a citizen's basic income of £61 a week can be paid for by reducing to zero your income tax personal allowance and the lower earnings threshold for national insurance contributions, and raising all national insurance contributions to 12%. And income tax rates would only need to rise by 3%. By doing that, we could provide every single working age adult with a citizen's basic income of £61 a week.
Why is it important for you, and why is it important in general?
After I left university, I worked for 2 years on the public counter in a means-tested benefits office. It was called the Supplementary Benefit Office then, and it was part of what was then called the Department for Health and Social Security. So for 2 years, I was facing some quite often angry members of the public and some quite stressed members of staff behind me trying to manage a really difficult means-tested benefit system. And the system was clearly bad for everybody. It was bad for the claimants in front of me, it was bad for people behind me. And at the same time, I realised just how useful child benefit was, because the child benefit is an unconditional income for every child. It goes to the child's carer. And it just kept on coming for everyone who was in front of me complaining about mistakes in their means-tested benefits. And so back then, I'd begun to think, well, why can't we do things generally rather differently so that it all looks a bit more like child benefit?
You mentioned implicitly a number of problems connected to administering benefits, and that this basic income would sort out. But there are probably as well benefits for people, and not only from the perspective of the government. Perhaps you could...
Oh, absolutely.
You could mention a few things.
Although
about this.
administrative problems affect the claimants of benefits just as much as they affect the government. And the administrative simplicity of a citizen's basic income is one of the most important things about it. Because of its simplicity, you could completely computerise it. So it would start at your birth and it would end at your death. And nothing would need to be done to it between those 2 points in time. It would just keep on coming. Very unlike our present means-tested benefit system, which is complex. It requires constant administration. It requires vast amounts of time and effort being put in by claimants and by the staff administering it. And it's full of errors. The error rates are huge, and fraud as well. And because fraud can happen within such a means-tested benefit system, and sometimes the difference between error and fraud is quite a difficult line to find, because what is simply an error can in fact legally be a fraud. And so both the staff and public suffer a great deal from the administration of means-tested benefits, and none of that would apply to a citizen's basic income. For 400 years, we've been means-testing benefits, and therefore we intuitively believe that if the poor need money, you should give money to the poor, which means that you then take it away from them if they become less poor, which means it's quite difficult for them to earn their way out of poverty. So that's something that's deeply embedded in our minds. And it means that an unconditional income sometimes finds it quite difficult to lodge in our minds as a sensible idea, because it's not something we're used to. It's counterintuitive, giving money to everybody, because people say, the rich don't need it. Why give it to the rich? The poor need the money. But unfortunately, if you give money just to the poor, it becomes an inefficient means-tested benefit. It is far more sensible to give money to everybody, and then you're taxing the rich more than they're receiving in their citizens' basic income anyway. So what's the problem? Especially if it's very efficient to give everyone the money. But there is still a problem with psychological feasibility.
It seems to me that this is connected, this psychological feasibility is related to the fact that we tend to associate income with work, and then this basic income would be a huge cultural and perhaps even anthropological change, because then people would have to start realizing that income is not necessarily connected to work.
One of the reasons why opinion may now be shifting, and it does seem to be, is that the employment market is becoming much more problematic for more people. And so it's beginning to be understood.
How could basic income empower people? How could it be an opportunity for people?
One of the important effects of a citizen's basic income would be to increase people's choices. And that is an empowering thing, of course. So if you've got more choices in the employment market, you might decide that if you're in a couple, one of you who's currently working full-time may well work part-time. Or you may both get part-time jobs instead of one of you getting a full-time job, for instance. You would have choices to make. And it's when people have choices that they start to look at what they're doing with their lives. And so, yes, you may well find that people with caring responsibilities can put more time into them. You might also find that because your marginal deduction rates have reduced, some people might seek more paid employment. So it could go either way. And the way it went would be actually largely up to you. And so what I'm saying is that the choices will be there, and we may see an increase in voluntary activity in the community. I hope we would. And there will be the opportunity for that. We may see more people putting more effort and time into caring responsibilities in relation to children, older parents, and so on. And there will be people more able to make those choices. With how they make choices, of course, we don't know. It's up to them. That's the whole point of a citizen's basic income. It gives people choices.
Get more from the Open University. Check out the links on screen now.